The night train rattled through the darkness, its wheels screeching against the tracks like a mournful cry. The dim lights in the carriage flickered, casting long shadows across the worn seats and the handful of passengers scattered throughout. Most were asleep, heads resting against the cold windows, or lost in their own worlds, staring at cracked phone screens or dog-eared books. But for Samuel Carter, a 67-year-old black man sitting alone near the back, the journey was anything but restful. Samuel looked unassuming, his gray hair cropped close to his scalp, his face etched with deep lines of a life hard lived. He wore a faded brown coat, the kind you'd find in a thrift store, and a pair of scuffed boots that had seen better days. His hands, weathered but steady, rested on his lap, holding a small leather journal he hadn't opened since boarding. To anyone glancing his way, he was just another old man, invisible in the way society often renders people like him. But Samuel was far from invisible. He saw everything. The carriage door slid open with a metallic groan, and a group of 4 young white men stumbled in, their laughter loud and abrasive. They were in their early 20s, dressed in torn jeans and hoodies, their faces flushed with the kind of reckless energy that comes from too much cheap beer. The tallest one, a lanky guy with a buzz cut and a crooked smirk, carried a half-empty bottle of whiskey in his hand. His name, Samuel would later learn, was Dylan. The others, 2 stocky guys with matching buzz cuts and a wiry one with a lip piercing, followed him like a pack of hyenas, snickering and egging each other on. Samuel kept his eyes on the window, watching the blurred shapes of trees and distant lights streak by. He'd learned long ago that the best way to avoid trouble was to blend into the background, to become part of the scenery. But trouble, it seemed, had a way of finding him. "Hey, bold man!" Dylan called out, his voice slurred but sharp with malice. He leaned against the seat across from Samuel, his friends forming a semicircle behind him. "You lost or something? This ain't your kind of train." Samuel didn't respond. He'd heard variations of this script his whole life, on street corners in Birmingham, in diners in Atlanta, in the barracks during his military days. The words changed, but the intent was always the same: to remind him of his place, to make him feel small. He'd learned to let the words roll off him like rain, but that didn't mean he didn't feel the sting. "I'm talking to you, Grandpa," Dylan said, louder this time. He took a swig from the bottle and wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. "What's a guy like you doing out here? Shouldn't you be, I don't know, picking cotton or something?" The others burst into laughter, the sound harsh and grating. A few passengers stirred, glancing over with uneasy expressions before quickly looking away. No one wanted to get involved. Samuel understood that. Fear was a powerful silencer. He finally turned his head, meeting Dylan's gaze. His eyes were dark and steady, the kind of eyes that had seen more than most people could imagine. "I'm just trying to get home, son," he said, his voice low and measured, with a faint southern drawl. "I don't want any trouble." Dylan's smirk widened. "Oh, you don't want trouble?" He leaned in closer, his breath reeking of alcohol. "Well, maybe trouble wants you. What you got in that bag, huh? Some fried chicken? Watermelon?" The laughter grew louder, more vicious. Samuel's jaw tightened, but he kept his composure. He'd dealt with worse than this, far worse. He thought of the jungles in Vietnam, the back alleys of East Berlin, the interrogation rooms where he'd stared down men who made these boys look like children playing dress-up. But those days were long behind him. He was retired now, a man who just wanted to live out his years in peace. Yet peace, it seemed, was a luxury he'd never fully know. "Look at him, actin' all high and mighty," the wiry one with the lip piercing said, sneering. "Bet he's one of those types who thinks he's better than us. Ain't that right, old man?" Samuel's hands tightened around the journal in his lap, but he didn't respond. He could feel the anger simmering in his chest, a slow burn that he'd spent decades learning to control. These boys didn't know who they were dealing with. They saw an old black man, someone they could push around to feel powerful, to feed their fragile egos. They didn't see the man who'd once disarmed a bomb with nothing but a pocket knife, or the man who'd taken down a cartel leader with his bare hands. Dylan reached over and snatched the journal from Samuel's lap, holding it up like a trophy. "What's this, huh? You writing a book or something? Let me see." He flipped it open, his fingers smudging the pages. "Aw, look at this. Poetry? You a poet, old man? Ain't that cute?" "Give it back," Samuel said, his voice still calm, but with an edge that hadn't been there before. Dylan ignored him, reading aloud in a mocking tone. "The moon weeps silver tears." "What the hell is this crap? You think you're Shakespeare or something?" He tossed the journal to one of his friends, who caught it and started tearing out pages, crumpling them into balls and throwing them at Samuel. That was the moment something inside Samuel snapped, not with a loud crack, but with a quiet, deadly shift. He'd spent his life enduring, surviving, rising above. But there were some lines you didn't cross, some things you didn't touch. That journal wasn't just a book. It was his sanctuary, the place where he poured out the pain and the memories he couldn't share with anyone else. And these boys had just desecrated it. He stood up slowly, his movements deliberate. At 67, he wasn't as fast as he used to be, but his body still remembered the training, the muscle memory of a life spent in the shadows. He was 6 feet 2 inches, broad-shouldered, and even in his old age, there was a quiet strength in the way he carried himself. "Give it back," he said again, his voice colder now, each word clipped and precise. Dylan laughed, stepping closer until he was inches from Samuel's face. "Or what, old man? You gonna cry about it? Go on, cry. I want to see it." Samuel didn't cry. Instead, he moved. It happened so fast that the boys barely had time to react. Samuel's right hand shot out, grabbing Dylan's wrist, the one holding the whiskey bottle, and twisting it with a practiced motion. The bottle fell to the floor, shattering into pieces as Dylan let out a yelp of pain. Before the others could move, Samuel drove his elbow into Dylan's throat, a precise strike that sent him choking and stumbling backward. The wiry one with the lip piercing lunged at Samuel, swinging a wild punch. Samuel sidestepped effortlessly, grabbing the boy's arm and using his momentum to slam him face first into the edge of a seat. There was a sickening crunch as the boy's nose broke, blood spraying across the floor. He crumpled, clutching his face and whimpering. The two stocky ones hesitated, their bravado fading as they realized this wasn't going to be the easy fight they'd expected. But Samuel didn't give them time to think. He moved like a predator, his movements fluid and efficient, a stark contrast to his earlier stillness. He grabbed the first one by the collar, pulling him down and driving his knee into the boy's stomach. The air left the boy's lungs in a whoosh, and he doubled over, gasping. The last one tried to run, but Samuel was faster. He grabbed the boy's hoodie, yanking him back and wrapping an arm around his throat in a chokehold. The boy flailed, his hands clawing at Samuel's arm, but Samuel's grip was iron. Within seconds, the boy's eyes rolled back and he went limp, unconscious but alive. The entire fight, if you could call it that, lasted less than 30 seconds. The carriage was silent now, save for the sound of Dylan's ragged breathing as he clutched his throat, still on his knees. The other passengers stared, wide-eyed, their mouths hanging open in shock. A young woman in the corner clutched her child closer, her face a mixture of fear and awe. An older man with a gray beard whispered, "My God." Samuel straightened up, his breathing steady, his face unreadable. He stepped over the unconscious bodies and retrieved his journal from the floor, brushing off the torn pages with a tenderness that seemed at odds with the violence he'd just unleashed. He tucked it into his coat pocket and sat back down, as if nothing had happened. Dylan finally found his voice, though it was hoarse and trembling. Who the hell are you?" Samuel looked at him, his eyes hard but not unkind. "I'm the man you shouldn't have messed with," he said simply. "Now sit down and shut up before I change my mind about letting you walk away." Dylan didn't argue. He crawled to a seat a few rows away, his friends slowly stirring and dragging themselves to join him. They didn't dare look at Samuel again. The train pulled into the next station a few minutes later, and the conductor, a burly man with a thick mustache, stormed into the carriage, alerted by the commotion. He took one look at the scene, the broken bottle, the blood on the floor, the bruised and battered boys, and then at Samuel, who sat calmly with his hands folded in his lap. "What the hell happened here?" the conductor demanded. Samuel glanced up at him, his expression neutral. "They started something they couldn't finish," he said. "I finished it for them." The conductor looked from Samuel to the boys, who were too scared to say a word. He sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "I'm gonna have to call the police. You'll all need to give statements." Samuel nodded. "That's fine. I've got nothing to hide." As the conductor led the boys off the train, their heads bowed in shame, the other passengers began to murmur among themselves. The young woman with the child approached Samuel hesitantly, her eyes shining with gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered. I was so scared, but you were incredible." Samuel gave her a small, weary smile. "Just doing what needed to be done, ma'am." The older man with the gray beard shuffled over next, extending a trembling hand. "I haven't seen anything like that since my days in the Marines," he said. "You're a hero, sir." Samuel shook his hand, but shook his head. "Not a hero," he said softly. "Just a man who's tired of seeing the same old hate." When the police arrived, Samuel gave his statement with the same calm precision he'd shown in the fight. He didn't mention his past, not the years he'd spent as a covert operative for the CIA, not the missions that had taken him to every corner of the globe, not the medals he'd been awarded in secret ceremonies. That part of his life was over, and he had no desire to relive it. But as he spoke, the officers exchanged glances, sensing there was more to this quiet old man than met the eye. The boys were taken into custody, charged with assault and public intoxication. Samuel declined to press charges. He'd already taught them a lesson they wouldn't forget. As the train pulled out of the station, heading toward its final destination, the carriage was quiet again, but the air felt different now. There was a sense of respect, of reverence, for the man in the faded brown coat. Samuel leaned back in his seat, closing his eyes. He thought of the journal in his pocket, of the words he'd written under a moonlit sky in a war-torn country decades ago. "The moon weeps silver tears," he'd written, "for the hearts that break in silence." He'd seen so much darkness in his life, so much hatred, but he'd also seen moments of light, moments like this, where justice, however small, prevailed. And for the first time that night, Samuel Carter allowed himself a small, quiet smile.